Billionaire's son pours hot coffee on Waitress. Didn't see the Mafia boss behind him watching. The scalding coffee hit Mary's chest and arms. She screamed, collapsed to her knees, skin already blistering beneath her soaked uniform. And Preston Hargrove laughed. Phone out. Recording her agony like entertainment. "That's what happens when you spill water on my sleeve, you clumsy bitch," he sneered. "Learn your place." Nobody moved. Waitstaff looked away. They needed their jobs. Wealthy patrons suddenly found their phones fascinating. In San Francisco's financial district, Preston Hargrove was untouchable, son of billionaire Conrad Hargrove. Above the law. Above basic human decency. But in the corner booth, something shifted. A man in a charcoal suit set down his teacup, unhurried, deliberate. Steel blue eyes locked onto Preston with unsettling stillness. His face betrayed nothing but something ancient and dangerous flickered behind that gaze. The look of a man who had seen violence, delivered violence, and feared nothing. Jasper Vance had watched enough, and Preston Hargrove had just made the worst mistake of his privileged life. If you believe in karma, hit subscribe. Like this video. Share it, because what happens next will satisfy your soul. Jasper Vance rose to his feet. The movement was slow and unhurried, as though time belonged to him, and to him alone. With one hand, he fastened the button of his suit jacket, then stepped out from the corner of the cafe, his measured footsteps sounding against the polished marble floor. The entire cafe fell silent. The wealthy patrons kept pretending to look at their phones, but their eyes slid sideways, tracking the stranger as he moved toward Preston Hargrove. Mary was still kneeling on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her trembling hands cradling the raw, burning patch of skin. She didn't dare lift her head. She didn't dare look at anyone. She only wanted to make herself as small as possible and vanish from this place. Jasper stopped 3 steps away from Preston. He said nothing. He only looked. Those steel blue eyes seemed to pierce the young heir's glossy, expensive exterior and stare straight into the hollow thing underneath. Preston felt that gaze, and something primal in him screamed a warning. But an ego pampered for 25 years wouldn't allow him to back down. "She needs medical attention." Jasper's voice was low, not loud, yet it carried through the cafe as if he were speaking in an empty room. Preston snorted, trying to reclaim his arrogance. "Mind your own business, old man. This isn't about you." Jasper didn't move. Not a single muscle in his face shifted. He simply stood there, silent, and that silence weighed heavier than any threat. Preston started to bristle. "Are you deaf?" I said, "Get out." Jasper tilted his head slightly, as if studying an interesting insect. Then he spoke, his tone still calm. "Preston Hargrove, second son of Conrad Hargrove, 25 years old. Expelled from Harvard after a sexual harassment scandal your father paid $2 million to bury." Preston went pale. The smile froze on his lips. "Net worth of $5 million in a trust you can't touch without your father's signature," Jasper went on, his voice even, like he was reading a dull report. "The penthouse you live in belongs to your father. The red Porsche parked outside is leased, not purchased. The credit card you use has a limit your father set. In the end, you don't own anything except your last name." Preston's face shifted from chalk white to a dark, furious purple. Never, not once in his life, had anyone dared speak to him like that. No one had ever stripped him bare in public like this. Who are you?" Preston stammered, the swagger gone from his voice. "How do you know those things?" Jasper didn't answer. He turned to Mary, stepped closer, and lowered himself onto one knee. The motion was unexpectedly gentle for a man who looked as cold as stone. "You need to go to the hospital." His voice softened, no longer edged the way it had been with Preston. "This burn has to be treated right away." Mary lifted her head, red-rimmed eyes searching the face of the stranger. In those steel blue eyes she saw something she hadn't seen from anyone else in this cafe for the last 15 minutes. Real concern. I don't have money," Mary whispered, her voice catching. "And I can't lose this job. My sister's in college. My grandmother needs heart medicine. She didn't finish. She didn't need to." Jasper understood. He had seen that look too many times. The look of people driven to the edge, of people who swallowed humiliation to survive, of people who didn't have the privilege of anger. He stood, drew a white envelope and a business card from the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed the envelope gently into Mary's hand, enough to cover the hospital and to rest for a few days, he said. Then the business card, plain white, no name, no title, only a string of phone numbers, was laid on top of the envelope. "If you need anything." Mary stared at the envelope, then up at Jasper, confused. "Why? You don't know me. Why would you? Not charity." Jasper cut her off, still steady. "Just balance." He straightened, tugged his cuff into place, and walked toward the door. As he passed Preston, he paused for a single second. He didn't speak. He didn't look. He only paused. And that 1 second was enough to send cold down Preston's spine. The cafe door closed behind Jasper Vance. Preston stood there with his fists clenched, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. Around him, curious eyes watched, phones quietly recording. For the first time in his life, Preston Hargrove tasted what it meant to be publicly shamed, and he swore he'd make them both pay. Preston wouldn't accept being humiliated like that. The moment Jasper left the cafe, he pulled out his phone and called Garrett Cole. Garrett had been head of security for the Hargrove family for 15 years. A big man with a weathered face and eyes as cold as someone who'd grown used to doing things ordinary people wouldn't even dare to imagine. In less than 20 minutes, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the cafe. Garrett stepped out with 2 men in black suits, built like walking slabs of stone. Preston jabbed a finger toward the corner of the cafe, where Jasper Vance had returned to his seat and was sipping tea as if nothing had happened at all. "That one," Preston growled. "Let him learn no one gets to insult the Hargrove family." Garrett nodded and led the 2 men toward Jasper's table. The cafe fell silent again. The remaining customers hurried to pay, unwilling to be anywhere near what was about to unfold. Garrett stopped at Jasper's table, the 2 men flanking him like a wall. "You just picked a fight with the wrong person," Garrett said, his voice low and rough. "I suggest you apologize to Mr. Hargrove and leave this city, immediately." Jasper didn't lift his head. He took one more sip of tea, set the cup down on its saucer with a soft clink, and only then raised his eyes to Garrett. Those steel blue eyes held no fear, not even interest, only a chilling indifference, as if the 3 men standing there were nothing more than annoying flies. "Tell your boss," Jasper said, his tone level. "Conrad Hargrove can't protect his son from consequences. No one can." Garrett hesitated. He'd threatened plenty of people in his life, and seen every reaction there was: fear, pleading, bravado. But this was the first time he'd met someone who didn't react at all, not afraid, not angry, not anything. As if this man existed on a completely different plane, where ordinary threats meant nothing. Garrett met Jasper's eyes, and the instinct of a man who'd lived in the dark for years warned him that this one was dangerous. Dangerous in a way he didn't want to understand. "We're leaving," Garrett said to the 2 men, then turned and walked away. Preston couldn't believe what he was seeing. "What the hell are you doing? I told you to teach him a lesson." "You don't pay me, Mr. Hargrove," Garrett replied coldly. "Your father does, and I'll report this to him." Preston stood there, face burning, watching Garrett and his men climb back into the SUV and drive off. Then he turned toward Jasper, who was still sitting there drinking tea with a calmness that made Preston feel like he was losing his mind. "You're gonna regret this," Preston roared. "Both you and that damn waitress." Jasper didn't say a word. He only sipped his tea. That afternoon, Preston was summoned to his father's office in Hargrove Tower. Conrad Hargrove sat behind an enormous oak desk, leaned back in a leather chair, eyes fixed on his laptop screen with tightly controlled fury. He was 58, salt and pepper hair, a sharp angled face, and gray eyes as cold as a man accustomed to seeing everything and everyone as numbers on a spreadsheet. "Your video is all over social media," Conrad said, his voice like ice. 200,000 views in 4 hours. The hashtag Hargrove Air is trending, and I'm in the middle of a $200 million negotiation with a Singapore investment fund. Preston swallowed. "Dad, I can explain." "Shut up," Conrad cut him off. "I don't care whether that waitress got burned. I care that you just turned my face into a joke in front of our partners." He stood and walked to the glass window, staring down at San Francisco spread out below. "Do you have any idea how much of your mess I've cleaned up?" "The girl at Harvard. I paid $2 million. The street race that killed someone. I paid $5 million to make it disappear. Where do you think that money comes from, Preston? Falling out of the sky?" Preston bit down hard on his lip. His father's words felt like knives carving into the fragile pride he had left. "Dad, there was a strange man in the cafe. He knew everything about me, about our family. Garrett. Garrett already reported to me, Conrad said, turning back, his eyes flat, and I told him not to interfere. I don't want more trouble while I'm negotiating something important. Preston froze. You mean, you're not going to do anything? Exactly. Conrad sat back down. This time, you handle your own mess. I've got bigger things to deal with. Preston stared at his father, and in that moment, he understood a bitter truth he'd spent 25 years trying not to see. Conrad Hargrove had never protected him out of love. Every cover-up, every payoff, every quiet arrangement had been about protecting the family image, the Hargrove brand, the deals and the numbers. In his father's eyes, Preston wasn't a son. He was a risk to be managed. He turned and walked out without another word. As he moved down the long, hollow corridor, Preston clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. If his father wouldn't help, he'd handle it himself. That waitress would pay for humiliating him. And that stranger, the man who'd looked at him like he was a worm, would learn what regret really felt like. Mary took the bus home after leaving the cafe. She sat in the very last row, curling in on herself inside a thin jacket, trying to hide the flushed red burn on her arm. The envelope of cash and the plain white business card were in her pocket, but she didn't dare think about them. She didn't dare think about anything. She only wanted to get home, to cry alone, to forget the humiliation of having scalding coffee spilled on her in front of dozens of people while not a single one of them stepped forward to protect her. The bus stopped in the Tenderloin, one of the poorest parts of San Francisco. Mary got off and walked through narrow, shadowed alleys where the air carried the sour stink of garbage and urine. Homeless people lay curled against the walls, and addicts swayed along the sidewalk. This wasn't a place where a young woman should live alone, but Mary had no choice. It was the only place she could afford, or at least try to afford. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of an aging building, the elevator broken for 3 months with no one coming to fix it. Mary climbed the stairs one step at a time, each one heavy as if she were dragging stones. When she opened the door, the familiar smell of damp and mildew hit her in the face. The apartment had one small bedroom, a living room that doubled as a kitchen, and a cramped bathroom. The walls were stained with moisture, the paint peeling away in ragged patches, the rusted pipes groaning every time a faucet was turned on. But everything was cleaned, everything in its place. The curtains washed bright white, a few small plants set on the windowsill to bring a hint of green into the dim room. That was how Mary fought poverty. She kept things tidy. She kept her dignity intact even while life tried, day after day, to grind it into dust. Brielle was sitting at the kitchen table, books piled around her. Mary's younger sister was 22, in her 3rd year of medical school at the University of California, San Francisco. Brielle was the family's only hope, the reason Mary worked 12 hours a day, the thing that kept her moving when everything felt hopeless. At the sound of the door, Brielle looked up, and her brow tightened the moment she saw her sister's state. "You're home. Why do you look?" "Mary, what's wrong with your arm?" Mary quickly tugged her sleeve down, trying to cover the burn. "It's nothing. I just fell. Spilled some hot water on myself." "Let me see," Brielle said, already standing and stepping closer. Mary backed up a step and shook her head. "Focus on studying. I'm fine. It's a small burn. I already took care of it." Brielle studied her with eyes full of doubt. She wasn't stupid. She knew her sister was hiding something. But she also knew Mary wouldn't talk if she pushed. Her sister had always been like this, carrying everything alone, shielding Brielle from the worries of their life. "Grandma's asleep," Brielle said softly. "She's a little better today. She took all her medicine." Mary nodded, forcing a smile. "Good. Keep studying. I'm going to shower and rest for a bit." She stepped into the tiny bedroom, closed the door behind her, and only then allowed herself to collapse. Mary slid down onto the floor, her back against the door, tears running down her cheeks. She cried without sound, her shoulders shaking in waves, trying to hold it in so Brielle wouldn't hear. After a few minutes, she wiped her face, stood, went to an old wooden dresser, and pulled open the drawer. Inside was a stack of bills. Rent was 2 months past due, totaling $2,400, and the landlord had sent a warning letter saying they'd be evicted if she didn't pay within 2 weeks. Brielle's tuition, the scholarship covered only half, and the remainder was $4,000 each semester that Mary had to come up with on her own. Heart medication for Grandma June, $800 a month. and the health insurance didn't cover that particular prescription. Mary did the math in her head and watched the debt climb higher and higher, like a mountain she couldn't possibly cross. 5 years ago, her parents had died in a car accident on the highway. A truck had lost control and slammed into their car, stealing 2 lives in the blink of an eye. Since then, Mary had dropped out of college, taking any job she could find to support her sister and her grandmother. At 27, she lived like someone 40, aged beyond her years by a weight no one helped her carry. Mary lifted her gaze to the family photo on the wall. Her father, her mother, herself, Brielle, and Grandma June, all smiling brightly on their last summer vacation before disaster struck. It was the last time she'd seen her whole family that happy. Tears rose again, but Mary swallowed them down. She didn't have the right to cry. She didn't have time to be weak. Brielle needed her. Grandma June needed her. She had to be strong. Mary set the bills back down, her mind made up. She'd take extra night shifts. She'd do anything to earn more money. She wouldn't let this family fall apart, even if she had to sacrifice everything. The next morning, Mary came to the cafe as usual. She tried to hide the burn on her arm beneath a thin bandage and a long sleeve, telling herself everything would be fine, that yesterday had only been a bad day and life would keep moving. But the moment she stepped in through the back door, the manager was waiting there, his expression strained and uneasy. "Mary, come into my office for a minute," he said, refusing to meet her eyes. Mary's heart sank. She knew something was wrong from the way he spoke, from the way the other employees glanced at her, and then quickly looked away. In the cramped little office, the manager sat down behind the desk, fingers laced together, still not looking straight at her. "I'm sorry, Mary, but I have to let you go." Mary stood there as if her feet had been nailed to the floor. "Let me go? But why? What did I do wrong?" "We received a complaint from a VIP customer," the manager said, his voice flat, like he was reading from a script that had been prepared in advance, "about your attitude, about you causing an incident that affected the customer's experience." "An incident?" He poured coffee on me. Mary couldn't hold it in anymore. "I'm the victim, not the one who caused anything." The manager exhaled, and for the first time he lifted his face to hers, his eyes full of sympathy and helplessness. "I know, Mary. I watched the video. I know you didn't do anything wrong. But," he hesitated, "Hargrove owns this building. He owns this whole neighborhood. If I don't fire you, he won't renew our lease, and I'll have to shut the cafe down. 30 employees will lose their jobs." Mary felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. "Please, I need this job. My sister's in college. My grandmother needs her medicine. I don't have anyone else." "I'm sorry," the manager repeated, his voice catching. "I'm truly sorry. I don't have any other choice." He slid an envelope across the desk. "This is your pay for the month, and a little severance. It's all I can do." Mary took the envelope with shaking hands. She wanted to scream, to smash something, to do anything that might loosen the injustice lodged like a hard stone in her chest. But she didn't. She only nodded, turned around, and walked out of the office. Mary went to the alley behind the cafe, the spot where she usually took 10 minutes of break time between shifts. She sank onto the cold concrete step, and for the first time in years, she cried without restraint. Not silent tears like the night before, but ragged sobs breaking out from deep in her chest, tears soaking her face. She cried for the unfairness. She cried for the helplessness. She cried because no matter how hard she tried, life still kicked her down every time she tried to stand. The days that followed were a long chain of disappointment. Mary crisscrossed San Francisco, submitting applications anywhere that was hiring. Restaurants, bars, hotels, cafes, retail stores. She filled out dozens of applications, sat through dozens of interviews, and kept hearing the same answers. "We're sorry. The position has already been filled. Your resume is impressive. We'll be in touch. We're looking for someone with different experience." At first, Mary thought she was just unlucky, but after 2 straight weeks of rejection from more than 30 places, she began to suspect something else. Until one day, when she went to interview at a small restaurant in the Mission District, the manager looked at her with quiet pity after checking her name in the system. "Are you Meredith Lawson?" he asked. "Yes, I am." "I'm sorry, kid," he murmured, as if afraid someone might overhear. "You've been blacklisted in the industry. No one in service or hospitality in San Francisco is going to dare hire you. Anyone who does will have trouble with the Hargrove family." Mary stood there, unable to speak. Preston Hargrove hadn't stopped at making her lose her job. He wanted to destroy her life completely. Her savings drained away. Her last paycheck and the severance from the cafe were only enough to cover 1 month of rent. Grandma June's medication bills still arrived like clockwork. Brielle's tuition deadline was closing in. Mary started skipping meals, giving the food to her sister and her grandmother, lying that she'd already eaten outside. Then, Grandma June collapsed in the bathroom. A mild heart attack, the doctor said, but she needed to be admitted for observation for at least 3 days. Mary stood in the hospital hallway, staring at the bill the nurse had just handed her, and felt like she was drowning in the middle of the ocean. She didn't know what to do anymore. She didn't know how to make it work. That night, sitting beside her grandmother's hospital bed, Mary scrolled through job listings on her phone with desperate focus, and she saw an ad. Hargrove Hospitality Services, urgently hiring staff for private events. Pay 3 times the market rate. No experience required. Immediate start. Mary stared at the name Hargrove and felt nausea rise in her throat. This was the enemy's company, the family that had ruined her life. But then she looked at Grandma June lying in the bed, thought of Brielle home alone, thought of the stack of bills in the drawer. She didn't have any other choice. Mary pressed apply. North Beach had once been the heart of San Francisco's Italian community, where the scent of espresso and fresh focaccia drifted out from family bakeries that had survived through generations. Tucked among narrow streets and old buildings shaped by European architecture, there was a modest cafe called Rosario's. From the outside, it looked like any other spot in the neighborhood, with small tables lined up on the sidewalk, the smell of espresso roasted on site, and older patrons sitting with the morning paper. But inside, beyond a thick oak door at the end of the hallway, there was a completely different world. Jasper Vance's office sat on the second floor, disguised as an ordinary conference room for a consulting firm. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to draw attention. Only soundproof walls, a top-tier security system, and a man behind a walnut desk reading reports on a laptop screen. Declan Murphy walked in carrying a thick case file. He was 40, with the unmistakable red hair of an Irishman, a face freckled all over, and sharp green eyes. Declan had been with Jasper for 12 years, since the early days when they'd been 2 men with nothing in their hands but anger and determination. Now he was Jasper's most trusted man, the only person allowed to enter this office without knocking. "I've gathered information on Preston Hargrove and his father, as you asked," Declan said, setting the file on the desk. "But before I get into the details, I've got a question." Jasper lifted his head, waiting. "Why?" Declan asked bluntly. "Why do you care about this girl? We've got hundreds of cases to handle, dozens of deals waiting. And you've spent 2 weeks tracking a waitress who got burned by coffee?" Jasper was silent for a long time. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at North Beach below, at pedestrians, passing cars, ordinary life moving along as if nothing in this world were worth worrying about. "You know, I came to America when I was 18, Jasper said, his voice low, as if he were telling an old story. "My family were poor immigrants, half Italian, half Irish, living in South Boston. My father worked loading cargo at the port. My mother worked in a garment factory 12 hours a day. They had nothing but the hope that their children would live better." Declan listened without a word. Jasper rarely spoke about his past, and every time he did, Declan knew it mattered. "I joined the Marine Corps because it was the only way I could afford college. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I came home with a Bronze Star and nightmares that never ended." Jasper turned back to Declan. "But do you know what was waiting for me when I got home?" Declan shook his head. "A letter from the bank saying our house had been seized. My father signed a predatory loan he didn't understand, and a real estate company tricked him out of the home he'd been paying off for 20 years. My mother couldn't take it. She got sick and died 6 months later. My sister had to drop out of college to work and pay the debt." Jasper's fist tightened. Even after all these years, the anger was still there, smoldering like coals that had never gone cold. "I tried to do everything the right way. I hired a lawyer, I sued, I filed complaints with every agency I could think of. Do you know what happened? The judge on the case was a golf buddy of the real estate company's director. The case was dismissed. No one cared about a poor immigrant family being robbed of their home. And that's why you stepped into this world," Declan said, not as a question. "That's why I understood the system wasn't built to protect the weak," Jasper replied. "It was built to protect the powerful. And when the system fails, someone has to step in and restore balance. He looked back out the window. That girl, Meredith Lawson. When I looked into her eyes that day, I saw myself 20 years ago. The helplessness, the desperation, the look of someone who knows she's being treated unfairly and has no way to fight back. Declan nodded slowly. He understood now. This wasn't only about that waitress. This was about Jasper himself, about old wounds that had never truly healed. "So what do you want me to do with all this information?" Declan asked. "Tell me," Jasper said, sitting down. "Everything about Conrad Hargrove and his son." Declan opened the file. Conrad Hargrove, 58, a real estate billionaire, estimated net worth of $2 billion. He owns more than 30% of commercial real estate in San Francisco. He's got relationships with the city's police chief, 3 federal judges, and at least 5 state legislators. His money has flowed into every major campaign over the last 10 years. Go on. Preston Hargrove, the second son, 25. Background exactly like what you recited that day in the cafe. But there's more that's interesting. Declan turned a page. At least 7 scandals buried over the last 10 years. 2 sexual harassment cases, 1 fatal street racing incident, 3 assaults. Every one of them vanished like they never happened. Hargrove uses money to buy silence. He does. But what's interesting is that recently, Preston started acting on his own. He put Lawson on a blacklist across the entire service industry in the city. And Declan hesitated. Hargrove Hospitality Services just posted an urgent hiring notice for event servers. Jasper's brow tightened. A coincidence? "I don't believe in coincidences," Declan said. "I think it's a trap." Jasper nodded, and the steel blue in his eyes darkened. "Investigate one more thing for me." "What is it?" "Lawson's parents. They died in a car accident 5 years ago. I want everything about that accident. Who investigated? What the conclusion was? Whether anything about it stands out." Declan looked at Jasper with curiosity. "You think it's connected to Hargrove?" "I don't think anything," Jasper replied, his voice cold as ice. "I just want the truth. And when I've got the truth, I'll decide what to do next." The office of Hargrove Hospitality Services was housed in a sleek glass building in the financial district, only a few blocks from the cafe where Mary used to work. She stood outside the door for a long moment, staring up at the sign bearing the name she'd learned to hate, Hargrove, the family that had ruined her life. But then she thought of Grandma June lying in the hospital, thought of Brielle trying to study inside their damp apartment, thought of the stack of bills piling higher and higher. She drew a deep breath and stepped inside. The reception lobby was spacious, with gleaming marble floors, expensive abstract paintings on the walls, and a receptionist smiling sweetly behind the desk. Everything gave off an air of professionalism and trust, as if this were a perfectly ordinary company, not one owned by people who had deliberately tried to destroy her life. "Hello, do you have an interview appointment?" the receptionist asked. "Yes, I'm Meredith Lawson. I applied for the event server position." "Oh yes, Ms. Lawson. Please go up to the 3rd floor. Human Resources is expecting you." The interview room felt comfortable, with soft leather sofas and a vase of fresh flowers on the table. The woman from Human Resources looked to be around 40, her brown hair cut neatly short, a smile always resting on her lips. She introduced herself as Margaret and began the interview with the usual questions about work experience, about handling pressure, about whether Mary could work night shifts. Mary answered each one carefully, trying to appear as professional as she could. She didn't mention having worked at the Gilded Sparrow, and she didn't mention why she'd been fired, but it turned out none of that mattered. "Your application is very impressive, Meredith," Margaret said after looking it over. 4 years of experience in service, strong ability to handle situations. "I think you're an excellent fit for this role." Mary blinked, surprised. "So that means I'm hired?" "Yes. You can start next week." Margaret slid a stack of contracts across the table. "Base pay is $3,000 a month, plus tips from events. Typically, our staff earn between $5,000 and $7,000 a month, depending on how many shifts they take." Mary stared at the numbers in the contract and didn't believe her eyes. 3 times her old pay, enough to cover rent, Brielle's tuition, Grandma June's medication, and still have a little left over. But precisely because it was so perfect, she felt something was off. "I'm sorry, but why is the pay so high?" she asked carefully. Is there something unusual about the job? Margaret gave a light laugh, as if she'd heard the question 100 times. We serve the upper tier, Meredith. Private events for wealthy families, parties hosted by business leaders and politicians. Our clients demand absolute perfection, and we pay accordingly for people who can meet that standard. The explanation sounded reasonable. Mary told herself she was being too suspicious, that not everyone with the name Hargrove was bad, that this was simply a normal service company. She needed this job. Her family needed the money. She signed the contract. That night, when Mary got back to the apartment and shared the good news with Brielle, her sister's reaction wasn't what Mary had hoped for. Hargrove Hospitality? Brielle frowned, pausing mid-reading. Mary Hargrove? Like the name of the guy who poured coffee on you? It's a different company, Mary said, in a voice that didn't sound convincing even to herself. Just the same name. San Francisco has hundreds of companies. Mary, it sounds too good to be true. Brielle set her book down and looked her sister straight in the eyes. Why would they pay that much for a regular serving job? Why would they hire you immediately when nowhere else would take you for 2 weeks? Mary avoided her sister's gaze. You're overthinking it. This is a good opportunity for us. You focus on studying, and let me handle the money. Sweetheart, come here. Let Grandma talk to you. Grandma June's voice called from the bedroom. She'd been discharged yesterday but was still weak and had to rest in bed. Mary went into the room and sat beside her. Grandma June took her granddaughter's hand, her aged eyes watching Mary with worry. I heard everything. Are you sure about this job? I'm uneasy. That Hargrove name, I don't like it. Grandma, I'll be fine. Mary tried to smile, to reassure her. It's just a normal event-serving job. Nothing dangerous, I promise. Grandma June was quiet for a long time, then sighed. You're just like your mother. Always carrying everything on your shoulders. Always telling everyone not to worry. I just want you to be careful. Mary bent to kiss her grandmother's forehead, trying to hide the unease gnawing at her. The first week at Hargrove Hospitality Services passed with surprising normalcy. Mary was assigned to serve at a small birthday party in a mansion on Nob Hill, a family dinner for a tech entrepreneur, and a golf club gathering. The clients were polite, the supervisors courteous, the co-workers friendly. Nothing was unusual. There was no sign at all that this was a trap. Mary began to breathe easier and scold herself for being so distrustful. Maybe it really was just an ordinary service company. Maybe she'd been lucky enough to find a good opportunity after those dark days. On Saturday night, just after Mary got home from her shift, her phone buzzed. A message from the company. Meredith, we have a special shift for you tomorrow night. VIP event in Pacific Heights. The client specifically requests staff with experience. Double pay. Confirm participation before 10 o'clock tonight. Mary stared at the message, her heart beating a little faster. Double pay. Enough to clear the remaining back rent in one shot. She didn't think much. She tapped to confirm. She didn't know that message hadn't been sent to any other employee. She didn't know Pacific Heights was where the Hargrove family mansion stood. And she didn't know Preston Hargrove had been waiting for this moment for 2 weeks. The Hargrove Hospitality Services van pulled up in front of the gates of a massive mansion in Pacific Heights at 6 o'clock in the evening. Mary stepped out with 4 other staff members, all of them in crisp black and white uniforms, and she couldn't stop the soft breath that slipped out of her when she saw where she would be working tonight. The estate sprawled across a hill, Mediterranean in style, with red tile roofs, creamy white walls, and tall arched windows reaching upward. The front garden was as large as the entire apartment building where Mary lived, with perfectly trimmed rows of cypress, a marble fountain, and rose bushes in full bloom. Warm golden lights glowed everywhere, creating an atmosphere that was both luxurious and faintly mysterious. This was the kind of wealth Mary had only ever seen in movies. The kind that made you feel short of breath because the distance between 2 worlds was simply too great. An event manager met them at the back entrance, guided them through the kitchen area, and explained their assignments. Tonight's cocktail party would have around 50 guests, all upper tier, business leaders and politicians. Their job was simple: serve drinks, carry trays of canapés, and most importantly, draw no attention whatsoever. You're ghosts, the manager said. Appear when needed, disappear when you're not. The client doesn't want to see you, they just want their glasses kept full. Understood? Mary nodded along with the others. She was used to instructions like this after 4 years in service. Becoming invisible was the skill she knew best. The party began at 7. Guests arrived one by one, men in perfectly tailored suits, women in evening gowns that glittered with diamonds. Mary moved through the crowd with a tray of drinks, smiling politely when she was addressed, dipping her head when she was thanked, and trying not to listen to conversations about million-dollar deals or vacations in places she could only dream of. She recognized a few faces from television: a state legislator, a technology CEO, an actor who had once won an Oscar. They laughed, they clinked glasses, they discussed the stock market and real estate as if numbers in the millions were nothing more than a game. No one looked at Mary. No one noticed she existed, and she felt relieved for that. The evening went smoothly for a few hours. Mary began to think she'd worried too much, that this really was just a normal job, that not everything connected to the Hargrove name had to be a threat. By 10, guests began to leave. Limousines and luxury cars lined up outside the gates, drivers opening doors as their owners stepped in. The party room gradually emptied, leaving only empty glasses and half-eaten plates behind. Mary and the other staff began to clean up. She was stacking glasses on a tray when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Surprised? Mary froze. Her whole body felt like it had been poured full of concrete, unable to move. She knew that voice. She'd heard it in her nightmares for the last 2 weeks. Slowly, she turned and saw Preston Hargrove standing in the doorway, a triumphant smile on his lips. He wore a navy suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking like a cat that had just caught its mouse. "You thought you could humiliate me in front of everyone and then disappear?" Preston stepped into the room, each footfall steady like a countdown. "You think I'd forget? That I'd let it go?" Mary backed up 1 step, her eyes darting around for an exit. The other staff were gone. Somehow. Vanished without her noticing. It was only her now in the wide room, alone with Preston and that poisonous smile. "I didn't do anything to you," Mary said, trying to keep her voice steady even though her heart was pounding like a war drum. "You poured coffee on me. I'm the victim." "Victim?" Preston threw back his head and laughed. "You're the victim? Do you have any idea what I had to endure after that day? My father chewed me out like a dog. The video went everywhere. People mocked me, called me a coward who got humiliated by some old man. And it's all because of you." Mary edged toward the main door, but a massive figure appeared and blocked her path. Garrett Cole, his face like stone, his eyes without emotion. 2 other men stepped out of the shadows, taking positions on either side like statues. "Where do you think you're going?" Garrett asked, his voice low and blunt. Mary turned, looking for the back door, but Preston signaled to someone. She heard a door slam, the sharp click of a lock. She was trapped in this room, no way out. "Where are the other employees?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Sent home." Preston shrugged. "They're not needed for the next part of the night. Only you were invited to stay." "You can't do this." Mary forced herself to find some courage. "People will look for me. My sister will call the police." "The police?" Preston laughed as if he'd just heard the funniest joke in his life. "This city's police chief has dinner with my father once a month. The judge who handles criminal cases is his golf buddy. You really think anyone's going to believe a poor waitress going up against a billionaire family?" Mary felt the blood in her body turn cold. She thought of the man in the cafe, thought of the plain white business card sitting in a drawer back home, but he wasn't here. No one was here. She was completely alone. "Last time, some mysterious man showed up and saved you," Preston said, stepping closer, his smile fading into something colder, something terrifying. "But now there's no one. No hero, no knight, just you and me." He nodded at Garrett. "Take her downstairs. I'll come down after." Garrett and the 2 men moved toward Mary. She tried to fight, but they were too strong. They dragged her through the corridor, down the staircase, and into a basement she hadn't even imagined existed beneath this luxury estate. The heavy iron door slammed shut behind her, and Mary knew her life had just turned onto a completely different path. The room was only about 3 square meters, boxed in by 4 dingy gray concrete walls and a weak light bulb hanging loosely from the ceiling. There were no windows, no furniture except a thin mattress on the floor and a plastic bucket in the corner. The stink of dampness and something she couldn't quite name slammed into Mary's nose as she was shoved inside. The iron door crashed shut behind her, the click of the lock echoing like a death sentence. Mary stood there in the dimness, forcing her eyes to adjust to the feeble light. She reached for her pocket and realized her phone was gone, taken at some point while Garrett and his men hauled her down here. There was no way to contact the outside, no way to call Brielle, No way to tell anyone where she was. She was completely cut off from the world. Mary sat on the thin mattress, pulled her knees to her chest, and tried to hold back the panic rising in her throat. She had to stay calm. She had to think. She had to find a way out. But the harder she tried to think, the more she saw there were no choices at all. She was locked in the basement of a mansion owned by one of the most powerful families in San Francisco. No one knew she was here. And even if Brielle called the police, Preston was right. The police belonged to the Hargrove family. Then Mary heard something. A sound from the other side of the wall. Whispering, coughing, soft crying. She pressed her ear to the cold concrete and listened. Not just one person. Many people. Many voices. In many languages. Spanish. Something that sounded like Tagalog. And English spoken with a heavy, dragging accent. Mary crawled to the iron door and peered through the narrow gap at the bottom. She could only see a dark hallway under a faint wash of light, but she could hear the sounds more clearly now, coming from other rooms. "Is anyone there?" she called softly, her voice rough. Silence for a moment. Then a woman's voice came from the room next door, tired and faintly startled. "A new one?" They caught another person. My name is Mary," she said through the gap. "I'm locked in here. Who are you? What's happening?" The woman sighed. "I'm Rosa. I've been here for 3 months. And what's happening? Welcome to hell, girl." Rosa's voice was low and heavy, the voice of someone who'd already made peace with her fate. Through their broken conversation through the crack, Mary began to piece together Rosa's story. Rosa was 50, from a small village in Guatemala. A year ago, she'd seen an advertisement recruiting workers for the United States, promising stable jobs, high pay, and legal visas. Her family was poor. Her son needed money for surgery, so she decided to take the risk. They charged a brokerage fee of $2,000, Rosa said, bitterness cutting through her words. "I had to borrow to get that money. They said once I got to America, I'd pay it off in a few months." But when Rosa and dozens of others arrived, everything changed. Their passports and identification were confiscated the moment they got off the plane. They were sent to different places, construction sites, restaurants, farms, and forced to work 16 hours a day. No pay, no days off, no right to resist. "Anyone who tries to run disappears," Rosa said, her voice trembling. There was a young girl, only 20 years old. She tried to climb the fence one night. The next morning, her room was empty. No one dared ask what happened. No one dared say her name again. Mary listened and felt nausea creep up her throat. This wasn't personal revenge anymore. This was an organized trafficking operation. Massive, running right under the nose of the San Francisco authorities. And Hargrove Hospitality Services was the cover for it. "How many people are here?" Mary asked. "In this basement? About 15. But they move people out and bring new people in all the time. I've heard there are hundreds like us scattered across California, working in Hargrove restaurants, hotels, and construction sites without anyone knowing." Mary leaned back against the wall, her mind spinning. She had been a waitress who'd had coffee poured on her, a nobody who'd accidentally angered a billionaire's son. And now she'd stumbled into something enormous, a criminal empire built on the blood and tears of hundreds of innocent people. "Why are you here?" Rosa asked. "You don't sound like the others. You speak English like an American." Mary told her story in short, tight pieces. The cafe, the cup of coffee, Preston Hargrove. Rosa went quiet for a long time. "So you angered the Lord's son," she said at last. "That's why you're here. Not to work, but to..." She didn't finish, but Mary understood. She hadn't been brought here to become part of the labor pipeline. She'd been brought here for Preston's revenge. And when he was finished, she would disappear, like the young girl Rosa had mentioned. "No one is coming to save us, girl," Rosa said, her voice sorrowful but gentle. "I've hoped for 3 months, hoped my family would find me, hoped the police would come, hoped someone would notice what's happening. But no one comes. They're too strong, too rich, too connected. No one can touch them." Mary closed her eyes and thought of Brielle, thought of Grandma June, thought of the plain white business card sitting in a drawer at home. The man in the cafe, Jasper Vance. What had he said? Not charity, just balance. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he could do. But he was the only hope she had left. "If Brielle found that card, I'll find a way," Mary said through the gap, steadier than she expected. "I promise you, Rosa. I'll find a way to get all of us out of here." Late at night, when the basement had sunk into silence and Mary was curled up on the thin mattress trying to find sleep. Heavy footsteps sounded from the direction of the stairs. A harsh, hiccuping laugh, the clatter of something hitting something else, then the sharp click of the lock turning. Mary jerked upright, her heart skittering out of rhythm. Light spilled in from the hallway, and she saw Preston Hargrove standing in the doorway. He was dead drunk, suit jacket hanging wrong, tie loosened, the drink in his hand tilted so a few drops splashed onto the floor. His eyes were bloodshot and dull, but when he saw Mary, a venomous smile bloomed across his mouth. "Oh, look who it is." Preston stumbled into the room. "My little princess. Did you sleep well? Do you like your new room?" Mary backed into the corner, putting as much space as she could between herself and the drunken man in front of her. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Preston threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete. "I want to talk. I want you to understand you pissed off the wrong person." He leaned against the wall, took a swallow, and watched Mary with the pleased expression of someone who held absolute control. "Do you know how powerful my father is? Conrad Hargrove, billionaire, real estate king. Half this city belongs to him. The police chief calls him Sir. Federal judges show up at his birthday parties. The mayor has to ask his permission before signing any project." Mary stayed silent, refusing to react. She knew better than to provoke a drunk man, especially a drunk man who held her life in his hands right now. All she had to do was endure, stretch time, hope he'd get bored and leave. "You don't believe me?" Preston swayed closer. "My father can make anyone disappear. Anyone. You hear me? People who cause trouble. People who threaten his empire. People who know too much. They all vanish. No trace. Nobody dares ask." Mary bit down hard on her lip, forcing her face to remain blank. In her head, Rose's words echoed, "Anyone who tries to run disappears." Preston slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the wall opposite Mary. He was too drunk to stay standing. "My father says you're a loose end," Preston muttered. "You know what a loose end is. It's the extra string that needs cutting. A problem that has to be handled." He gave a lazy, ugly laugh. "And my father is very good at cutting loose ends." Then Preston tilted his head, studying Mary with a curiosity that felt like looking at an animal in a cage. "Hey, what's your last name again?" "Lawson, right. Meredith Lawson." Mary went rigid. She didn't know why Preston was asking, but instinct warned her something was wrong. "Lawson," Preston repeated, as if searching his memory. "That name sounds familiar. I swear I've heard it somewhere." He took another drink, his brow furrowing with the effort of thinking through the alcohol fog. Then suddenly his eyes lit up. "Oh, I remember now." Preston slapped his thigh. "Lawson. That car accident a few years back. My father mentioned it once. An accountant working for a Hargrove subsidiary found something he wasn't supposed to find and was going to report it." Mary felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Her father had been an accountant. Her father had died in a car accident 5 years ago. "Just like your parents," Preston went on, his words thick with drink. "An accident. Everybody believes it's an accident. A truck loses control on the highway. Tragedy, heartbreaking. Nobody suspects a thing." The world around Mary seemed to stop. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, each thud like a hammer striking bone. What did you just say?" Her voice was only a whisper. Preston looked at her, and for a split second a shard of sobriety flickered in his eyes. He realized he'd said too much. But then, maybe because of the liquor, maybe because of the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable, he only shrugged. "Ask Garrett. He was the one driving that truck. Did a hell of a job. 5 years and nobody's suspected anything. The case has been closed for a long time. No evidence, no witnesses, nothing." Preston pushed himself up, unsteady. "Anyway, I just came down here to visit you, to make sure you know what your future looks like. Tomorrow, or the day after, you'll disappear too. Just like your parents. Just like everyone who causes trouble for the Hargrove family." He walked out, then turned back one last time, smiling drunkenly. "Sleep well, princess. Enjoy your last nights." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Footsteps faded. Then silence. Mary sat there, unmoving. She couldn't move. Her body felt frozen solid, her mind drowning beneath a tidal wave of truth she'd never imagined. Her parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been killed. Garrett Cole, The head of security with the stone-cold face she'd seen at the cafe and at the mansion tonight was the one who had driven the truck into her parents' car on the highway 5 years ago. And Conrad Hargrove, the billionaire kingpin, had given the order. 5 years. 5 years of living in grief, carrying everything alone, raising her sister, caring for her grandmother, working 12 hours a day just to scrape by. 5 years of asking herself why fate had been so cruel to her family, why her parents had to die, why she had to lose everything. And now she knew the answer. Not fate, not an accident. Murder, conspiracy. The crime of people with money and power. Mary collapsed, pressed her face into the mattress, and for the first time in years, she truly cried. Not from fear, not from humiliation, but from loss, from truth, from the pain of 5 years of being lied to. Her tears soaked into the thin mattress while, from the room next door, Rosa listened in silence, not knowing what she could say to comfort a soul that had just been crushed a second time. Brielle sat on the old sofa in their apartment, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting. The wall clock ticked past 11 at night, then midnight, then 1 in the morning. Her sister had said her shift would end at 10, so why hadn't she come home yet? Brielle gripped her phone and called Mary's number for the 10th time that night. The number you have dialed is not reachable. Please try again later. The same cold, automated answer as every time before. Brielle tried to calm herself, telling herself maybe Mary's phone had died. Maybe she'd been asked to stay late. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation. But her instinct, the instinct sharpened by years of hardship, was screaming that something was wrong. Brielle didn't sleep that night. She lay on the sofa with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening for the smallest sound, hoping it would be the key in the lock. But Mary didn't come home. The next morning, as soon as the sky began to brighten, Brielle started searching. She went to the Gilded Sparrow, the cafe where Mary had worked before she was fired. The manager looked uncomfortable when Brielle asked about her sister. Ms. Lawson hasn't worked here in more than 2 weeks. I don't know where she is. Brielle asked Mary's old acquaintances, former co-workers, anyone who might know where her sister had gone. No one knew. Mary had lived too quietly for years, pouring all her time into work and family, with no close friends, no one she confided in. Then Brielle remembered Mary's new job, Hargrove Hospitality Services. She found the company number online and called, forcing her voice to stay steady. Hello, I'm calling about an employee named Meredith Lawson. Did she come into work yesterday? Silence on the other end for a moment. Then the receptionist's voice, sweet and empty at the same time. I'm sorry, but there's no employee named Meredith Lawson in our system. Brielle went still. That can't be right. My sister was hired last week. She worked an event in Pacific Heights last night. I've checked very carefully, ma'am. We don't have any employee by that name. Is it possible you've got the wrong company? Brielle ended the call, her hands shaking. Not in the system. As if Mary had never existed. As if her sister had been erased from every record. She went back to the apartment, fighting the panic rising in her chest. She had to stay calm. She had to think. She had to find some way to find Mary. Brielle, has Mary come home yet? Grandma June's voice called from the bedroom, weak but threaded with worry. Brielle swallowed her tears and forced her voice to sound normal before she stepped into the room. She's on a short work trip, Grandma. The company has an event out of town. She'll be back in a few days. Grandma June looked at her, her old eyes sharper than Brielle expected. You're hiding something from me, aren't you? It's nothing, Grandma. You rest. I'll make you some rice porridge. Brielle escaped the room, not daring to stay any longer because she knew she'd break down. She went into Mary's room, a small space with a single bed and an old wooden dresser. She started to search, not even sure what she was looking for, only hoping there'd be some clue. In the nightstand drawer, beneath a stack of unpaid bills, Brielle found it. A white business card. No name, no title, no address. Only a string of phone numbers printed in black ink on clean white paper. Brielle held the card, her brow tightening. She remembered Mary mentioning what had happened at the Gilded Sparrow, the billionaire's son who'd poured coffee on her, and the stranger who'd stepped in to protect her. Someone helped me that day. I don't know who he is, but he left a phone number, Mary had said when Brielle asked about the burn. Brielle stared at the card, then at the phone in her hand. She didn't know who this man was. She didn't know what he could do. She didn't know if calling a complete stranger was the right decision. But she didn't have any other choice. The police wouldn't help, not with the Hargrove family as the enemy. She didn't have money, connections, or any resources to find her sister. This mysterious man was the last thin thread of hope. Brielle dialed, her heart beating out of control. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then someone picked up. Yes, a man's voice said, low and cold, not friendly at all. Brielle drew a deep breath and forced her voice not to shake. My name is Brielle Lawson. My sister, Meredith Lawson, is missing. She took a job with Hargrove Hospitality Services and went to work last night, but she didn't come home. Her phone can't be reached. The company says there's no employee by that name. I don't know what to do. I found this number in my sister's things. Silence on the other end. Brielle held her breath, afraid he'd hang up, afraid this would be another dead end. Your sister is the girl who had coffee poured on her at the Gilded Sparrow, the man asked after a moment. Yes, that's her. My sister said someone helped her that day. Please, if you know anything, help me find her. It's just me, her, and our grandmother. I can't lose her. Brielle's voice cracked, tears spilling despite her effort to hold them back. The silence stretched so long Brielle thought the call had dropped. Then the man spoke again, still cold, but with something else underneath it. A kind of resolve Brielle didn't understand yet could feel. Where are you right now? At home. Our apartment in the Tenderloin. Stay there. Don't call the police. Don't contact Hargrove Hospitality again. Don't tell anyone about this call. But I'll pick you up in 30 minutes. Wait there. The call ended. Brielle stared at her phone screen, unsure whether she should feel relieved or more afraid. She'd just reached out to a stranger who might be dangerous, who might be the only person who could save her sister. But for Mary, she'd step into any world, no matter how dark it was. The black SUV stopped in front of Brielle's building exactly 30 minutes after the call. Declan Murphy stepped out, his face cold, his eyes sweeping the street as if he were measuring every possible threat. Brielle stood in the doorway, her heart thundering, unsure what she was walking into, but she didn't have a choice. For Mary, she would face anything. During the entire drive, Declan didn't say a single word. Brielle sat in the back seat, watching San Francisco slide past the window, forcing herself to remember the route in case she ever had to run. The SUV stopped in front of a small cafe in North Beach, and Brielle was led through the back door, up the stairs, and into an office she never would have guessed existed behind the cafe's ordinary front. Jasper Vance was seated behind a desk when she walked in. The man Mary had mentioned, the one who had stepped in to protect her sister in the cafe that day. He looked different from what Brielle had imagined. Not a glossy movie hero, but a middle-aged man with a face like stone, sharp steel blue eyes, and a frightening stillness around him. He gestured to the chair across from him, and Brielle sat, fighting to keep her hands from shaking. Tell me everything, Jasper said, his voice low and even. From the beginning, Brielle told him everything. About Mary being fired, about how her sister couldn't find work anywhere, about the new job at Hargrove Hospitality Services, about last night's shift in Pacific Heights, and how Mary had vanished without a trace. She spoke through tears spilling down her cheeks, her voice breaking but staying as clear as she could so she wouldn't miss a single detail. Jasper listened without interrupting. When Brielle finished, he went quiet for a long time, his steel blue eyes fixed on nothing, as if he were arranging pieces inside his mind. Hargrove Hospitality, he said at last. I know that place. At that moment, the door opened, and Declan stepped in, carrying a thick case file. He set it on Jasper's desk, his eyes flicking toward Brielle with a trace of hesitation. Boss, the results on the car accident 5 years ago. You should see this. Jasper opened the file, and as he read, the face that was already cold turned darker, the steel blue in his eyes holding a storm somewhere deep inside. Brielle watched the two men, not understanding what was happening. What accident? What does that have to do with my sister? Jasper lifted his head to look at her, and in that moment Brielle saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Compassion. Your parents died 5 years ago, didn't they? In a highway car crash. Brielle nodded, her heart beginning to pound faster. Yes. A truck lost control and hit their car. It was an accident. The police said so. Jasper slid the file toward her. It wasn't an accident. Brielle took the file with trembling hands and began to read, and with every line, her world collapsed a little more. Thomas Lawson, Mary and Brielle's father, had been an accountant for a subsidiary of the Hargrove Group. 5 years ago, in the course of his work, he discovered serious irregularities in the books. Conrad Hargrove was using the company for large-scale money laundering. Hundreds of millions of dollars from illegal operations routed through phantom real estate projects to make them look legitimate. Thomas had been an honest man. He decided to gather evidence and report it to the authorities. But Conrad Hargrove had eyes and ears everywhere, and he learned of Thomas's plan before it could happen. Conrad ordered it handled. Garrett Cole, Hargrove's head of security, carried it out. He drove a truck straight into the Lawson family's car on the highway on a rainy night. Thomas and his wife died on impact. The case was disguised perfectly as an accident caused by a truck losing control on a slick road. The police investigator assigned to the case was Hargrove's man. The judge was Conrad's golf buddy. No one was prosecuted. No one was held accountable. The Lawson family received not a cent in compensation because the fault was blamed on the weather. And 2 young girls lost their parents and were left to fend for themselves. Brielle finished reading, and she couldn't cry anymore. She just sat there, hollow, as if someone had pulled her soul out through her ribs. My parents were murdered. Her voice was only a whisper. Jasper nodded, his expression grave. And your sister is in the hands of that murderer. Preston Hargrove took her as revenge for what happened at the cafe. But worse than that, your sister now knows too much about what the Hargroves are doing. She won't be released. Brielle looked at Jasper, her eyes red but filled with resolve. You'll help me find her. You'll save my sister. Jasper rose and walked to the window, looking down at North Beach below. He was silent for a long time, and when he turned back, there was a fire in his eyes that Brielle had never seen in anyone. Declan, get the team ready. Contact all our people. Tonight we move. Declan nodded, but he looked hesitant. Boss, that's the Hargrove mansion in Pacific Heights. Heavy security. If we fail, there won't be a way back. Jasper held Declan's gaze, his voice cold as ice but hard as steel. If we don't act, we deserve to fail. He turned to Brielle, his tone softening just a little. You stay here. You're safe. I'll bring your sister back. Brielle stood, her hands clenched tight. I want to come with you. No. My sister is the only person I have left. I can't sit here and wait while I don't know if she's alive or dead. I'm a third-year medical student. If anyone's hurt, I can help. Jasper studied the young woman in front of him and saw in her eyes the same resolve he'd seen in Mary's eyes that day in the cafe. The hard resilience of people who had nothing but willpower left to fight with. You've got courage, he said at last. Like your sister. Then he turned to Declan. Get her a medical kit. She'll be in the vehicle. And if we need her, she'll be ready. Declan nodded and left the office. Jasper looked out the window again, the city lights reflected in his steel blue eyes. Tonight, blood debts would be paid. The meeting room on the 2nd floor of Rosario's was more crowded than usual. Declan stood beside the large map mounted on the wall, where a satellite image of the Hargrove estate in Pacific Heights had been blown up and marked with hand-drawn lines, showing entry points, exits, and the locations of security cameras. 4 other men sat around the table, all of them people who had followed Jasper for years, men he trusted with his life. No one asked why they had to move so fast. When Jasper gave an order, they carried it out. That was how things worked. The estate has 12 security cameras covering the entire exterior, Declan began. 4 guards on rotating patrols, each shift lasting 4 hours. Garrett Cole is head of security, usually inside the main house. The basement has its own access from the back, through the kitchen area. Jasper stood at the head of the table, steel blue eyes moving over the map, committing every detail to memory. Our goal isn't only to rescue Meredith Lawson. Based on what I have, the basement of this mansion is holding at least 15 victims of a trafficking operation. Every one of them needs to be brought out safely. One of the men, a big guy named Marco, spoke up. 15 people? How do we move that many without being seen? We won't try to hide, Jasper replied. Before we move, I'll send all evidence of Hargrove's trafficking operation to the FBI and the 3 largest news outlets in the city. By the time we enter the estate, it'll be public. Hargrove won't have time to call in his connections. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to bury it. Declan nodded in agreement. Best time is 2 in the morning. That's when the guards switch shifts. There'll be about 10 minutes of chaos. We go in from the back through the garden, disable cameras, neutralize the guards. Then we get to the basement, free the victims, and pull out before dawn. "What about Preston Hargrove and Garrett Cole?" Marco asked. "Leave them to me," Jasper said, his voice cold as ice. The meeting ended, and everyone dispersed to prepare. Brielle sat in the corner through the entire briefing, listening in silence. When only she and Jasper remained, she stood and stepped in front of him. "I want to come." Jasper shook his head. "No, you're safer here. This isn't a game." "I know it isn't a game," Brielle said, her voice steadier than she expected. "My sister is in there. My parents were murdered by those people. I can't sit here and wait, not knowing what's happening." Jasper studied her, saw the resolve in her eyes didn't waver. "You aren't trained for combat. You'll be a liability. I don't need to fight." Brielle pulled out her phone. "I'm a third-year medical student. If anyone gets hurt during the rescue, I can help. The victims locked in that basement might need medical care immediately. Give me 20 minutes and I'll have enough supplies and medication." Without waiting for Jasper's approval, Brielle dialed a classmate. "I need a favor. Don't ask questions. Just help me. I need a fully stocked first aid bag, painkillers, gauze and bandages, IV fluids if you can get them. Meet me in North Beach in 30 minutes. I'll explain later." She ended the call and looked back at Jasper with a challenge in her eyes. Jasper was silent for a long moment. Then a faint smile flickered across his mouth, the first smile Brielle had seen since meeting him. "You've got courage, like your sister." He nodded. "All right, you'll be in the vehicle with Declan. If things are safe, you'll go in afterward to treat the victims, but if there's any sign of danger, you leave immediately. No negotiation." Brielle nodded, relief loosening something in her chest even though she knew tonight would be the longest night of her life. The next hours passed in tense preparation. Brielle received the medical bag from her classmate and checked every item inside. Jasper's team checked their gear, weapons, communications. Everything was arranged with meticulous care, like a wound-up machine waiting for the moment it would spring to life. Late at night, when everyone was ready and they were only waiting for departure time, Jasper sat alone in his office. The room was dark, lit only by streetlight through the window, casting dim stripes across the floor. He sat in silence, eyes fixed on nothing. Declan entered without knocking. "Boss, everything's ready." He paused, studying Jasper. "You okay?" Jasper didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the quiet North Beach street below. "Tonight we balance the world again, Declan, like we always do." Declan nodded, understanding there was nothing more to say. He turned and left, giving Jasper a few final minutes alone with his thoughts before the storm began. Jasper put on his suit jacket, checked the handgun in its holster, and walked out. His team was waiting downstairs. 4 black SUVs parked in a dark alley. Brielle stood beside Declan, her face tight with tension but set with resolve. Jasper looked at them. People willing to step into danger for strangers, for justice the system never delivered. "Let's go," he said, and the convoy surged into the night. At 2 a.m, 4 black SUVs stopped 2 blocks away from the Hargrove estate. Jasper and his team moved through the darkness like ghosts. Without a sound, without a single light, they'd studied the layout carefully, knew every camera angle, every blind spot, every habit of the security detail. This was the shift change, the 10 minutes of chaos they needed to get inside. Marco and another man approached the electrical control box behind the mansion and cut power to the camera system and the floodlights covering the basement area. In an instant, part of the estate sank into darkness. Jasper led the main team forward, crossing the wide garden with footsteps as soft as a cat's. 2 guards smoking in a corner were subdued before they even understood what was happening. Fast, clean, professional. No shouting, no blood. Only 2 unconscious bodies dragged into the shrubs and tied down with care. Declan's voice came through the radio. "Entry is clear. 2 targets neutralized. Continue as planned." Jasper nodded even though Declan couldn't see it, and the team kept moving. They entered through the back door by the kitchen, exactly as planned. Inside, the house lay silent in the sleep of people so rich they never had to fear anything. Jasper led them down the stairs to the basement, where his information said Mary and the other victims were being held. The iron door to the basement was locked, but that didn't stop them. Marco had specialized tools, and within 30 seconds the lock was open. The smell of dampness and trapped bodies hit Jasper as he stepped down. The basement corridor was nearly black, lit only by a few weak bulbs trembling overhead, but he could hear breathing, shifting, frightened whispering from behind the iron doors lining both sides of the hall. Jasper went to the first door and looked through the small slot. Inside, a woman lay curled on a thin mattress. He recognized her instantly. Meredith Lawson, the girl from the cafe. The girl with eyes full of helplessness and desperation. The girl who was the reason he was standing here tonight. "Open it," he ordered. Marco broke the lock, and the iron door swung open with a long, metallic groan. Mary bolted upright, eyes wide, her body folding in on itself like an animal cornered. Then she saw the man in the doorway, the cold face with steel blue eyes she would never forget. The man from the cafe, the one who'd stepped in for her, the one who'd left the plain white business card. "You," Mary whispered, as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. "You're safe now," Jasper said, his voice still cold but softened by something underneath it. "Come on." Jasper's team moved on, opening the other doors. Room by room, victim by victim, people were freed. Rosa was the first to step out, her old eyes shining with tears as she looked at the corridor filled with men in black opening doors for the imprisoned. She couldn't believe it. 3 months locked in that dark room, 3 months with no hope, and now freedom was standing right in front of her. "Gracias, gracias." Rosa threw her arms around Jasper, sobbing into his shoulder. "Thank you, thank you." Jasper let her cry for a few seconds, then gently eased her back. "Stay with my people. They'll get you somewhere safe." Declan took command of moving the victims. 15 people, exactly as Jasper's information had said, were guided out of the basement, up the stairs, through the garden, and toward the vehicles waiting outside. Brielle stood there with the medical bag in her hands, her eyes searching for one familiar face among the crowd of people being led into the night. When Mary emerged from the darkness, Brielle ran to her and wrapped her in a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mary, are you okay?" Mary held her sister, her body trembling, but she didn't cry. She'd cried enough in that dark room. There were no tears left now. Only something burning in her chest that she couldn't smother. When Brielle was guided away to help treat the other victims, Mary turned back to Jasper. He was standing by the back door of the mansion, his eyes sweeping the grounds as if he were waiting for something. "Why?" Mary stepped closer, her voice rough from days of captivity. "Why did you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why?" Jasper looked at her, steel blue eyes steady. "Because no one else will." Mary stayed quiet for a long moment, trying to find the meaning behind that simple answer. Then she drew a deep breath and said what she'd wanted to say ever since she'd learned the truth in the dark room. "I know the truth. About my parents." Preston said it when he was drunk. "They didn't die in an accident. They were murdered." Garrett Cole drove the truck into their car, and Conrad Hargrove gave the order. Jasper nodded, not surprised. "I know. I investigated." Mary stared at him, and in that moment every pain, every loss, every injustice of the last 5 years compressed into a fire blazing in her eyes. Tears slid down her face, but she didn't sob. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, straightened her spine, and looked Jasper in the eye. "I want to see them pay. All of them. Conrad, Preston, Garrett. I want to watch them fall." Jasper looked at the young woman in front of him and saw what he'd once seen in the mirror 20 years ago. The fire of justice. The fire of people with nothing left to lose. The kind of fire that, once lit, nothing could put out. "You will," he said. "But first, there's one more thing we have to do." Jasper and Mary were halfway up the stairs from the basement when a figure appeared and blocked the way. Preston Hargrove stood at the top step, his face drained of color, his eyes bloodshot, a handgun pointed at them, but his hand was shaking so badly the barrel wavered without stopping. This wasn't a cold-blooded killer. This was a child spoiled for 25 years, facing brutal reality for the first time in his life. "You can't do this," Preston screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Do you know who I am? My father will destroy all of you. You'll disappear like you never existed." Declan stood behind Jasper, his hand already resting on the gun at his hip, ready to move. But Jasper lifted a hand, signaling him to stop. He stepped up one stair, then another, moving toward Preston with a calm that was almost terrifying, as if the gun in Preston's hand were a toy, as if Jasper wasn't afraid of death at all. "Are you going to shoot me?" Jasper asked, his tone as mild as if he were talking about the weather. "And then what? You think your father will save you, the way he saved you every other time?" Preston tightened his grip, trying to look threatening. "He always saves me. He can make anyone disappear." "He saves his image," Jasper said flatly. "Not you. You think he paid to clean up your scandals because he loves you? No, he did it because you're part of the Hargrove brand. You're a tool, Preston. A tool he maintains because it's useful. And the moment it stops being useful, he'll throw it away like broken equipment." Preston swayed. Jasper's words were knives cutting into a wound he'd spent his whole life trying to hide. He remembered his father's cold eyes in that office, the way he'd said, "This time you handle your own mess." There had been no worry, no love, only the irritation of a boss dealing with an incompetent employee. "Do you know what happens now?" Jasper went on, climbing another step. The distance between them was only a few feet now. "The FBI is on the way. The press already has the full evidence of your father's trafficking ring. In a few hours, everything will blow open, and your father, the man you think will save you, will be the first to dump every bit of blame on you to save himself." "No, he won't," Preston stammered, but the certainty was gone from his voice. "He will," Jasper said, unwavering, "because that's who he is. You know why he let you handle this girl on your own? Because if it goes bad, you take the fall, not him. You were never a son in his eyes, Preston. You were a sacrificial piece." The gun lowered a little. Tears began to spill down Preston's cheeks even as he tried to stop them. 25 years living in his father's shadow, 25 years trying to prove himself. 25 years wondering why his father never looked at him with pride. Now he knew the answer, and it hurt worse than any injury. "You've got two choices," Jasper said, his voice softening slightly. "First choice, you testify against your father. You tell the FBI everything you know about the trafficking ring, about the murder disguised as an accident, about every crime the Hargroves committed. You'll still do time, but as a cooperating witness, it'll be less. You'll have a chance to rebuild your life when you get out." Preston looked at Jasper, eyes raw and red. "What's the second choice?" "You follow your father's path. You stay quiet and hope he'll save you. And when he doesn't, when he dumps everything on you to save himself, you die in prison with charges for trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Or worse, you disappear before trial because your father is afraid you'll talk." Silence stretched on. Preston stood there, the gun dangling in his hand now, no longer aimed at anyone, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he were fighting himself. "Why?" he asked at last, his voice hoarse. "Why do you care what I choose? I've done horrible things. I hurt her." He glanced toward Mary behind Jasper, his eyes full of guilt. "I don't deserve a choice." Jasper was quiet for a moment. Then he said, his voice low and distant, "Because someone once gave me the second choice when I deserved to be destroyed. Years ago, I stood where you are. I thought there was no way out, but someone gave me a chance to change, even when I didn't deserve it. I'm paying that debt forward." Preston lifted his head and met Jasper's eyes for the first time. Then he looked at Mary, the girl he'd poured coffee on, kidnapped, locked in a basement, threatened to kill. She stood there in silence, her gaze on him without the hatred he expected, only the cold steadiness of someone who'd moved beyond fear, someone who'd accepted the truth and was waiting for justice. Mary didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. The gun slipped from Preston's fingers and hit the floor with a thin metallic clink. Preston dropped to his knees, covered his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking in waves. Tears ran through his fingers, and for the first time in 25 years, he cried. Not because he didn't get what he wanted, but because he finally saw what kind of monster he'd become. "I'll testify," Preston said through sobs. "All of it. Everything I know. About my father, about Garrett, about the trafficking, about her parents' accident. All of it." Jasper stepped forward, picked up the gun, and handed it to Declan. Then he looked down at Preston, the steel blue in his eyes no longer as cold as before. "That's the first right decision you've ever made," he said. "Let's hope it won't be the last." At 4 a.m, Conrad Hargrove's phone began ringing nonstop in the vast bedroom of the main estate in Presidio Heights. He jolted awake and snatched it up with the irritation of a man accustomed to having everything obey him. even sleep itself. Yes, this better be important. Boss. Garrett Cole's voice burst through the line, so frantic Conrad almost didn't recognize it. Garrett, the man who never lost his composure, the man who had handled dozens of difficult matters for the Hargrove family without blinking. Someone broke into the Pacific Heights mansion. Preston's been taken. The merchandise has been freed. They're organized, boss. This isn't amateurs. Conrad sat bolt upright, the blood in his body turning cold. What? Where's Preston? Where the hell are the guards? The guards were neutralized. Preston is with them. I don't know what he told them, but... Call the police chief right now, Conrad shouted into the phone. Call Judge Morrison. Call every contact we've got. I don't care what time it is. Wake them up. Conrad ended the call and started dialing on his own phone. First number. The San Francisco police chief. The man Conrad had taken to dinner every month for 10 years. The man who'd accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in contributions to campaigns and retirement funds. It rang. Once. Twice. Then he answered. Bill, I need you right now. Someone broke into my place. I need you to send people immediately and, Conrad. The police chief cut him off, his voice cold and distant. I can't help you this time. What? What the hell did you just say? Don't call me again. And the line went dead. Conrad stared at the phone, not believing what he'd heard. He dialed the next number. Judge Morrison, the man who'd ruled in Conrad's favor in dozens of Hargrove-related cases. The number had been disconnected. He called a state legislator whose campaign he'd funded. No answer. He called the head of the San Francisco FBI field office, a man he'd rubbed shoulders with at charity galas. Busy signal. One number after another. Every relationship Conrad Hargrove had spent 30 years building. All of it silent, as if he'd become invisible overnight. As if the people who once bowed to his money and power no longer knew his name. Conrad understood. He'd played the power game long enough to know what this was. The ship was sinking, and the rats were running. Someone had made it public. Someone had forced his contacts to choose between saving him and saving themselves. And they had chosen. There was no time to panic. Conrad shifted into survival mode. He opened the safe in his bedroom and pulled out a forged passport, $1 million in cash, and a backup phone. He'd prepared for this scenario a long time ago. A private jet always on standby at a private airfield outside the city. A house in a country with no extradition treaty. Hidden bank accounts no one knew about but him. Conrad drove into the night, avoiding major roads. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. He would get out. He always got out. Money and preparation would save him like it always had. A white Gulfstream sat on the runway when he arrived. The pilot was ready, engines warming. Conrad climbed aboard, sank into a soft leather seat, and for the first time all night, he let out a breath. Take off, now. The jet began to roll down the runway. Conrad closed his eyes and pictured a new life somewhere far away, where he would rebuild his empire. He'd done it once. He could do it again. Then he heard it. Sirens. Red and blue lights flashing through the plane window. Conrad opened his eyes and looked out. Dozens of FBI vehicles had surrounded the runway. A helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight washing the entire area in hard white glare. The jet stopped. There was nowhere left to go. The phone in Conrad's pocket vibrated. An unknown number. He answered, his hand shaking. Your empire is falling, Mr. Hargrove. A low, cold voice came through the line. Conrad recognized it. The voice of the man in the cafe, the one who dared to face Preston, the one Garrett had warned was not normal. Who the hell are you? Conrad growled. Your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland have been frozen, the voice continued, calm as if reading the weather. Hargrove Corporation's board is in emergency session to vote you out as chairman. The press is broadcasting this arrest live, and your son Preston is signing a cooperation agreement against you. You can't do this, Conrad shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Do you know who I am? I will. Who are you? The voice cut in. You're Conrad Hargrove, a real estate billionaire who built an empire on the blood and tears of innocent people. A man who killed a family to silence a witness. A man who turned hundreds of human beings into labor slaves. You ask me who I am. I'm consequence, Mr. Hargrove. The consequence of a system that forces good men to become something else, just to survive. And consequence has arrived. The line went dead. The aircraft door was pulled open from the outside. FBI agents flooded in, weapons aimed straight at Conrad. Conrad Hargrove, You are under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Conrad was cuffed and led out, where dozens of television cameras were already waiting to capture the collapse of an empire. Dawn was rising over San Francisco, pale gold sunlight breaking through the clouds. At the Pacific Heights mansion, Garrett Cole was walked out in handcuffs, the hardened face that once looked threatening now holding only the emptiness of a man who knew he was finished. Preston Hargrove sat in the back of an FBI vehicle, hollow-eyed and streaked with tears, signing page after page of statements without hesitation. And off to the side, Mary and Brielle stood together, fingers laced tight. They watched the Hargrove empire fall in front of them, watched the people who had killed their parents led away in cuffs. Tears slid down both their cheeks, but they weren't tears of suffering. They were tears of justice, of an ending, of a new chapter beginning. 1 year later, a federal court in San Francisco delivered its verdict in a trial the entire nation had been watching. Conrad Hargrove, once called a real estate kingpin, the man who had made police chiefs and judges bow their heads, now stood in an orange prison uniform and listened as the judge sentenced him to 35 years in prison for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Garrett Cole, the loyal head of security, received 25 years for manslaughter and for his role in the deaths of Thomas and Margaret Lawson 5 years earlier. Preston Hargrove, as a cooperating witness, received 3 years and voluntarily renounced his entire inheritance, transferring it into a fund to support trafficking victims. When the judge struck the gavel to end the proceeding, Mary sat in the back row gripping Brielle's hand, and for the first time in 5 years she felt her parents could finally rest. 1 year after the trial, San Francisco witnessed the birth of the Lawson Foundation, a charitable organization supporting victims of labor exploitation and human trafficking. The foundation's headquarters was set in the very building that had once housed Hargrove Hospitality Services, where the old sign had been taken down and replaced with a new name, a symbol of transformation from darkness into light. Mary stood in her new office, looking down through the window at the bustling city of San Francisco below, and smiled. She was no longer a terrified waitress pushed to the edge. She was the founder and executive director of an organization that had helped more than 300 trafficking victims in its first year. Rosa became the foundation's first employee. The Guatemalan woman who had once been locked in a dark basement now stood at the reception desk, welcoming new immigrants who came searching for help. She understood them in a way no one else could, because she had once been where they were. And every time she helped someone escape modern slavery, she felt as if she were paying back a part of her debt to life. Brielle graduated from medical school on time and became a volunteer physician for the foundation. She spent her weekends providing free care to newly rescued victims, people who often carried wounds both physical and unseen. Each time she saw gratitude in their eyes, she remembered that night, the night she had found the courage to call a stranger to save her sister. Grandma June lived with her granddaughters in a small house in the suburbs, no longer forced to worry about medication costs or rent. Her health was stable, and every morning she sat on the front porch watching her granddaughters leave for work and study, proud of what they had survived and what they were building. One autumn afternoon, Mary stood inside the Gilded Sparrow, the cafe where everything had begun. The cafe no longer belonged to Hargrove. It had been bought and converted into a worker-owned cooperative. Mary was one of the investors and now served as a part-time manager, a way of remembering the place where she had fallen and risen again. The door chime rang, and Mary lifted her head. A man in a charcoal gray suit walked in, steel blue eyes sweeping the room before settling on a familiar corner. Jasper Vance sat down at the small table by the window, the very spot where he had sat on that fateful day 1 year ago. Mary carried a cup of tea to his table, then sat across from him. They were quiet for a moment, looking at each other, not needing many words because there were too many things words couldn't hold. "I never thanked you properly," Mary said at last, "for everything you did, for saving me, for bringing justice to my parents." Jasper took a sip of tea, his gaze drifting toward the window. "Some things don't need thanks. You do what's right because it's right, not because of what you get back." Mary nodded, understanding. Then she asked softly, "Will you keep going, protecting people like me? People who don't have anyone on their side?" Jasper set the teacup down and looked her in the eye. "There will always be the powerful who prey on the weak. That's the nature of this world. And there will always be a need for someone in between. Someone willing to step into darkness to protect those in the light." He stood, leaving money for the tea on the table. Mary rose too, unwilling to let the moment end. "Will you come back?" Jasper turned to look at her, and for the first time Mary saw a real smile on his lips. Not cold, not mocking, but warm. The smile of a man who had found meaning. "I'll always be in the corner when you need me." Jasper walked out, merging with the flow of people on the streets of San Francisco. The late afternoon sun fell over him, stretching his shadow along the sidewalk. He walked with his back straight, his steps steady, like someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was doing. "Two worlds will always exist," his voice echoed in her mind, like a reminder to himself and to anyone listening. "The world of those who believe might makes right, and the world of those who know that true strength lies in protecting others. We may walk in darkness, but we do so to protect those in the light." Mary and Jasper's story is a reminder that justice may come late, but it will come. That in this world, even when there are people who use money and power to crush others, there will always be people willing to stand up for what is right. That real strength isn't measured by how much money sits in your account or how many people bow before you, but by whether you use what you have to protect others or to destroy them. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss more moving stories. Please hit like and share this video with the people you love, the people who need to be reminded that justice still exists in this world. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever witnessed injustice that no one dared speak about? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear what's in your heart. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Wishing you and your family good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.